I never imagined that my daughter-in-law would say something like that at my son's funeral. It was supposed to be a day of mourning, a day when we should all come together as a family. Instead, there she was, whispering loudly, "I'm not taking care of that old witch," as if I wasn't standing right in front of her. The words cut through the room, louder than the soft sobs of the mourners. I felt my heart stop for a moment, frozen in disbelief. How did it come to this? How had everything I believed in, everything I had worked for, come crashing down so quickly? My son, David, was gone, and with him went the last shred of what had once been a family. As I looked around, the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of her words. I stood there, numb, my mind racing. There was no time to grieve. Not yet. The pain would come later, when I was alone. But for now, I had to process what had just happened. I'm not taking care of that old witch. Those words would echo in my mind forever, like a cruel joke that was too painful to laugh at. I had always been there for my son. Through thick and thin, I had supported him, loved him, and now, in the moment when I needed my family the most, I was cast aside like a burden. I had raised David to be a good man, or at least I thought I had. But now, as I looked at him, lying cold in that casket, I realized that I didn't really know him at all. "Mom, are you okay?" David's voice from the past echoed in my mind. But this wasn't the son I had known. He had become someone else. Someone who couldn't even look at me. Someone who would let his wife treat me like this. I wanted to scream, to confront Laura, to ask her how she could say such a thing, but I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. I had raised a son who was too afraid to stand up for me. A son who would rather side with his wife than his mother. I had always tried to be a good mother, to support my family, to make sure everyone was happy. But now I realized how wrong I had been. They didn't need me. They didn't care about me. I was just an inconvenience. As I stood there, the tears finally began to fall, but they weren't for David. They were for myself, for the family that had betrayed me, for the love that had been wasted on people who never truly cared. But I wasn't going to let this define me. I wouldn't let them see me broken. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the memory of David, who deserved better than this. I had to hold my head high, even though every part of me wanted to crumble. It wasn't going to be easy, but I would get through this. I would find a way to survive. And one day, when they least expected it, I would show them just how wrong they were to treat me like this. I had my dignity, and that was something they could never take away. I stood there, frozen in the moment, as the words Laura had just spoken hung in the air like a thick fog. The whispers around me were loud, but my mind was deafeningly silent. It was impossible to ignore what had just happened. My son's funeral should have been a moment of grief, a time to reflect on the life we had lost. But instead, it was becoming a painful reminder of how much I had lost in my own family. The room felt colder now, emptier than it ever had. I looked at the coffin in front of me, my son's lifeless body resting there, and I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me. How had things gotten so bad? How had David, the boy I had raised with love and care, become so distant, so lost in the shadow of his wife's influence? As the mourners moved around me, offering their condolences, I felt like an outsider in my own life. They were all strangers to me now, even the ones who had once been my closest friends. No one seemed to notice that the pain I was feeling was not just from losing my son, but from the family I was losing in the process. I tried to focus, to remind myself that this was about David, not about my own hurt. But the truth was, every time I looked at Laura, I felt something break inside me. She stood there, her eyes cold, not a shred of warmth or sympathy for me in her gaze. How could someone I had welcomed into my family with open arms turn on me like this? I wanted to confront her, to ask her what had happened, to demand some respect, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. She had already made up her mind about me. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a nuisance. But I had never been one to back down. Not for David, not for anyone. I had spent years being the supportive, loving mother, doing everything I could to make sure everyone was happy. But now, standing in this empty room, I realized it had all been in vain. I had given so much, only to be cast aside when I was no longer useful. The weight of that realization settled on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to do next. My heart ached for David, for the life we had shared, but there was no time to mourn him. Not when I was being forced to fight for my own dignity. I turned and walked out of the room, trying to keep my composure, but I could feel the tears threatening to spill. The air outside was cold, but it didn't matter. I needed to breathe, to think. As I walked down the path, my mind kept replaying the events of the day. What had Laura meant by those words? Why had she treated me like this? And where did David stand in all of this? I had to know. I couldn't just let this go. Not now. Not after everything I had been through. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. The world around me seemed to blur as I walked, lost in my thoughts. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the victim. I wasn't going to let Laura, or anyone else, dictate my life anymore. I had been a mother, a wife, and a woman who had given everything for her family. It was time to take back what was mine. I had to get away from the funeral, from the house, from the pain. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted. The cool air hit my face, but it wasn't enough to clear the fog in my mind. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Laura's words echoed relentlessly. I'm not taking care of that old witch. How could she say that? How could anyone be so cruel? I never thought it would come to this. I had spent years being the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law. I had always put my family first, supported them, loved them unconditionally. But now, as I walked alone on the empty street, I realized how little they valued me. The betrayal stung. I had known something was off for months. David had become distant after his father died. I thought it was just grief, that he needed time to heal. But now, I wondered if that was just an excuse. Was Laura the one who had pulled him away from me? I had tried to be understanding, to give them space, but every time I reached out, they pushed me further away. Laura's coldness had always been there, but I hadn't wanted to see it. The way she would avoid eye contact, the way she would make excuses when I suggested spending time together. It was all so clear now, like a puzzle falling into place. But it wasn't just Laura. David had changed too. He had stopped calling, stopped visiting. Our conversations became short, meaningless exchanges, and I couldn't help but feel that he was no longer the son I had raised. I had always been there for him, but now, I felt invisible to him. My heart ached for the relationship we once had, but I knew I couldn't force him to care. As I walked, I realized something. I had been living in their shadow for so long, trying to be the good mother, the good mother-in-law, that I had forgotten about myself. I had been so focused on making them happy, I had neglected my own happiness. That had to change. I wasn't going to let Laura and David treat me like this anymore. I didn't deserve it. I had given everything for them, and now it was time to take back my life. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had to find my own peace, my own happiness. As I stood there, taking in the quiet of the street, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer let them walk all over me. I would take control of my own life, no matter how difficult it would be. I would be the one to decide what happened next. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to finally get their attention. I didn't need them to validate me. I was enough on my own. I couldn't stand the thought of going back to that house, to the place where everything had started to fall apart. The silence in the funeral home still clung to me, thick and suffocating. I needed to get away. I needed to clear my head. The world outside felt different now, colder somehow. I had spent so many years wrapped up in the warmth of my family, thinking that everything was fine, thinking that we were close, that we were a team. But now I saw the truth. I wasn't just losing David. I was losing them all. My whole life had been about making sure everyone else was happy, making sure my family was taken care of. And for what? So they could turn their backs on me when I needed them the most? I had given everything. And yet, all it took was a few cruel words from Laura to make me realize how little they valued me. I stood at the edge of the street, not knowing where to go, but knowing I couldn't stay here any longer. My heart was heavy with the weight of it all. The pain of losing my son, the betrayal from my daughter-in-law, the realization that I had been nothing more than an afterthought in my own family. As I walked, the streets seemed to blur around me, my mind racing. What had happened to the family I once knew? How had we become so disconnected, so distant? And where had I gone wrong? I wanted to scream, to demand answers from David, from Laura, from anyone who could explain how everything had unraveled so quickly. But deep down, I knew the answer. They didn't care. Not like I cared. They never had. Maybe it was my fault for always putting their needs above mine, for always sacrificing my own happiness for theirs. Maybe that was the mistake. I had spent so many years playing the role of the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, trying to make everyone happy, trying to keep the peace. But in the end, all that had done was push me further into the background. I had allowed myself to fade into the background while everyone else took center stage. And now, when I needed them, they weren't there. I knew it was time for a change. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I had to take control of my own life, find my own happiness, even if that meant stepping away from the family I had worked so hard to build. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had spent too long putting others first. Now it was my turn. I walked into a small cafe, the warm air inside offering a brief respite from the chill of the street. I sat at a table by the window, staring out at the busy street, lost in thought. As I looked out, I realized something. I didn't need them to be happy. I had my own strength. I had survived the hardest parts of my life, and I could survive this too. It was time to stop being the victim, time to stop letting them control my happiness. The pain of losing David would always be there, but I could choose how to handle it. I could choose to move forward, to find peace within myself, and to finally start living for me. As I sat there, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own life. And that was all that mattered. I had spent so many years bending to their will, accommodating their needs, always putting them before myself. But now, as I sat in that small cafe, alone with my thoughts, I realized that it was time to stop. The days of sacrificing my happiness for theirs were over. The years of being invisible, of feeling like a stranger in my own family, were behind me. I didn't need their approval, their love, or their attention. All I needed was myself. I had spent too much time trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for me, trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, the perfect woman. But now, I was done with perfection. I had nothing left to prove to anyone. The world outside continued on, but inside me, something had changed. I was no longer the woman who waited by the phone for her son to call. I wasn't the woman who sat silently at family gatherings, trying to make peace while my heart broke. I was stronger than that now. As I walked out of the cafe, the cold air felt different, invigorating. It wasn't just the brisk wind, it was the feeling of reclaiming control over my own life. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to let them define me. The next time Laura or David crossed my path, they would see a different woman. I didn't need to explain myself to them. They would either accept me as I was, or they would lose me. It wasn't a choice I had made lightly. In fact, it was the hardest decision I'd ever made. But deep down, I knew it was the right one. For too long, I had let them use me, take advantage of my love and generosity. But no more. I had made mistakes too, but I was done paying for them. I had to put myself first for once. It wasn't easy to face the reality of it. To face the fact that the people I had loved the most, the people I had raised, had turned their backs on me when I needed them. But in that moment, I realized something. I had already lost them. They weren't the same people anymore. I wasn't the same person anymore. And that was okay. It had to be. I couldn't hold on to the past. I had to let go. As I stood there, staring at the city around me, I realized that I was free. Free from the expectations, free from the hurt, free from the lies. And I would rebuild. Slowly, but surely, I would rebuild my life. It wouldn't be easy, but I had faced worse. I had survived losses, heartbreaks, and betrayals. And I would survive this too. The pain of losing my son would always stay with me, but I could learn to live with it. I could learn to heal. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I had my strength. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I had no idea what I was doing anymore. For so long, I had lived my life for them. David, Laura, the family. I had been the caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who always put everyone else's needs before my own. But standing there in that moment, I realized something that shook me to the core. I had been invisible to them all. They had stopped seeing me as a person, as a mother, as someone who had once been at the center of their lives. And in that moment, I realized how much I had lost. I wasn't just losing my son. I was losing everything I had ever worked for, everything I had ever known. I couldn't help but think about the countless times I had tried to show love, to be there for them, to support them. And every time, I was met with silence, with coldness, with distance. I had been so wrapped up in trying to fix their problems, in making sure everything was perfect, that I had neglected my own happiness. I had let them walk all over me, and I had allowed it to happen. I had made excuses for their behavior, always telling myself that it was just a phase, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew the truth. Things weren't going to get better. Not unless I made them better. I had to stop waiting for them to change. I had to change. I had to let go of the past and start living for myself. But where would I begin? I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what my future would look like. But for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside of me. A glimmer of hope, a spark of determination. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I wasn't going to let Laura's words, David's silence, or anyone else's expectations control my life. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But I had faced harder challenges before, and I had come out stronger. The pain of losing David would always be there, but it wouldn't break me. I wouldn't let it. I would learn to live with it, to carry it as a part of me, but it wouldn't control me. I would rebuild. I would find my own path, my own way, and I would walk it with my head held high. As I walked away from the cafe, a new sense of clarity began to wash over me. I wasn't alone in this world. I had myself, and that was enough. I didn't need them. Not anymore. I had made up my mind. The path ahead was unclear, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer going to be the person they wanted me to be. I was done being the shadow in my own family, done being the silent observer while everyone else took center stage. It was time for me to take control, to stand tall, to demand the respect I had so long been denied. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had lived most of my life trying to fit into their mold, doing everything for them, never asking for anything in return. But now, as I walked through the empty streets, I realized that I was the one who had lost my way. I had lost myself in the process of giving everything I had to them. I had let them define me, let their actions and their words dictate my worth. But not anymore. I wasn't going to live my life in the background anymore. I wasn't going to let Laura's coldness or David's silence keep me in the shadows. I had too much to offer, too much life left to live, to let them continue to tear me down. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. It wasn't the freedom I had once dreamed of, where everything was perfect, where my family was happy and whole. No, it was the freedom that comes with letting go of the past, with accepting that I could no longer change the people around me, but I could change myself. I could choose how I wanted to live. I could choose how I wanted to feel. And I wasn't going to waste another day allowing them to have power over me. The pain of losing David, the heartbreak of realizing how little he truly cared, would stay with me for a long time. But I knew I couldn't let it define me. I couldn't let it consume me. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, even if that meant doing it alone. As I walked through the city, I began to feel something stir inside me. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. It was the spark of a new beginning. I wasn't sure what that new beginning would look like, or where it would take me, but I knew it would be different. I wasn't going to let the past hold me back anymore. I wasn't going to let the betrayal, the heartbreak, the pain of losing my son be the thing that defined me. I was going to define myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face whatever came next. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let fear control me. I had the strength to move on, to find peace, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. And that was all that mattered. I woke up the next morning, feeling an unfamiliar sense of clarity. For the first time in what felt like forever, my mind was quiet. The endless thoughts and worries that had plagued me for months were gone, replaced by a calm determination. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle it. I had spent so many years trying to fix things for others, trying to make sure everyone else was happy, that I had lost sight of my own happiness. I had sacrificed my own well-being for the sake of my family, and where had it gotten me? Alone, betrayed, but not anymore. Today was the first day of the rest of my life, and I was determined to make it count. As I walked through the city, I noticed the little things that I had once overlooked. The smell of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe, the sound of birds chirping in the trees, the warmth of the sun on my skin. I had always been too busy, too focused on everyone else, to notice these small, beautiful things. But now, they felt like a reminder that life was still worth living, that there was still beauty in the world, even after everything I had been through. I thought about David, about how he had been my everything for so many years. I thought about how I had given him everything, my love, my support, my time, and how he had turned his back on me when I needed him the most. But I knew now that I had to let go. I couldn't keep holding on to the past, couldn't keep letting the pain of losing him consume me. I had to move forward for myself. I had to let go of the woman I had been and become the woman I was meant to be. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. There would be days when I would still feel the sting of betrayal, when I would still miss the family I thought I had. But I also knew that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had survived so much already, and I would continue to survive. As I stood at the edge of the park, looking out over the city, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. It wasn't the peace I had once imagined. Perfect, calm, with everything falling into place. It was a different kind of peace. A peace that came from accepting the chaos, from knowing that I didn't have to have everything figured out to move forward. I didn't need their approval, their love, or their validation anymore. I had my own strength, and that was enough. I smiled to myself, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. It had been a long time since I had smiled like that. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on the path to becoming the person I had always wanted to be. The person who was strong enough to let go of the past and build a future that was all my own. I woke up that morning with a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for a phone call from David or an apology from Laura. I was moving forward, and nothing was going to stop me. The sun was shining through the window, and as I got out of bed, I realized something. This was my life now. The life I had fought for, the life that was going to be mine and mine alone. I made myself a cup of coffee, savoring the quiet of the morning. The house felt different now, quieter, but in a way that was comforting. It wasn't the emptiness I had felt before, it was the silence of a fresh start. I wasn't bound by the expectations of anyone else anymore. I had spent so much of my life trying to make everyone else happy, trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect mother-in-law, the perfect woman. But I had realized something important. I had to be the perfect me first. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't need to be. But I was enough. I had always been enough. It had taken me losing everything to realize it. But I finally understood that I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. Not to David, not to Laura, and certainly not to anyone else. I was enough as I was. I spent the day doing things I had put off for years. I cleaned out the attic, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I found old boxes of photos, of memories I had packed away. I smiled at some, cringed at others, but I didn't feel the sadness that I used to feel when I looked back. Instead, I felt a sense of release, a sense that I was finally letting go of the past. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadow of what had been. I was going to create something new, something that was just for me. Later that evening, I sat down to a quiet dinner, just me. It was strange, but in a good way. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I felt like I was finally living my life the way I was meant to. There were no more expectations, no more judgment, no more pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was just me, and that was enough. I thought about David and Laura. I wondered if they even realized what they had done, if they understood the pain they had caused me. But in that moment, it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to waste another moment of my life thinking about them. I had a future to build. I had my own happiness to find. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from letting go of everything that holds you back. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just free. And that freedom was everything.